Shadow Reel, File 001, Minority Report, the movie that saw our future before we did. What if the most disturbing prediction in Minority Report wasn't about stopping crimes before they happened, but about quietly teaching the world to accept a future that didn't exist yet? For more than 2 decades, this film has been remembered as one of Hollywood's greatest science fiction thrillers, a spectacular collaboration between Steven Spielberg and Philip K. Dick's visionary imagination. A blockbuster filled with futuristic gadgets, holographic interfaces, autonomous vehicles, biometric surveillance, personalized advertising, predictive policing, and artificial intelligence. Most people watched it as entertainment. But what if entertainment was only the cover story? Because the deeper this investigation goes,
the stranger the timeline becomes. Long before smartphones became extensions of our bodies, long before facial recognition cameras appeared in airports, shopping malls, and city streets, long before algorithms began predicting what we would buy, watch, believe, or even who we might become, Minority Report had already imagined a world where prediction was more powerful than observation. A world where data mattered more than evidence. Where probability slowly replaced certainty. And where the greatest source of control wasn't force. It was information. Coincidence? Perhaps. But this is where the case becomes impossible to ignore. During production, Spielberg didn't rely only on screenwriters or visual artists. He assembled an extraordinary group of scientists, engineers,
technology researchers, futurists, interface designers, architects, and AI specialists to imagine what the world might genuinely look like decades into the future. They weren't simply creating science fiction. They were conducting something much closer to a large-scale thought experiment. Many of the concepts discussed inside those private meetings would later appear in technologies we now use almost every single day. Some were surprisingly accurate. Others became even more sophisticated than anyone involved had expected. Which raises a disturbing possibility. Was Minority Report predicting the future or helping design it? Because once enough people imagine the same future, companies begin building it. Governments begin preparing for it.
Engineers begin solving it. And society slowly starts accepting it. That's when this investigation stopped being about a movie. It became an investigation into one of the most influential blueprints of the 21st century. So before we examine the predictions themselves, we first need to open the original file. Because every prediction has an origin. And according to the archive, this one began long before the cameras ever started rolling.
And before we unlock the first classified document, I have one request. If investigations like this are the kind of stories you've been searching for, stories that go beyond movie reviews and dig into the hidden history, forgotten production files, unsettling predictions, and the strange ideas that seem to echo through reality, then you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Take a second to leave a like on this video. It may seem like a small action, but it's what helps these investigations reach people who are just as curious about cinema's darkest mysteries. And I want to hear your thoughts before we go any further. Have you ever watched a movie that later felt less like fiction and more like a glimpse of the future?
Comment below and tell me which film made you feel that way. I read every investigation that continues in the comments, and many of the future case files on this channel begin with ideas shared by viewers like you. Finally, if you don't want to miss the next files we uncover, subscribe to Shadow Reel and join this growing archive of cinematic investigations. Because some movies entertain, some movies disturb. and a very small number leave behind evidence. Now, let's open the first document.
The first document doesn't begin in 2002 when Minority Report reached theaters around the world. It begins more than 4 decades earlier with a writer who spent much of his life questioning whether reality itself could be trusted. In 1956, Philip K. Dick published the short story The Minority Report, a compact piece of speculative fiction that asked a dangerous question. If the future can be predicted, does free will still exist? At first glance, it sounded like classic science fiction. But hidden beneath its pages was something much more unsettling. A warning about surveillance, authority, and the growing temptation to let prediction replace human judgment. For decades, the story remained just another remarkable work from one of science fiction's most visionary minds.
Then, in the late 1990s, it landed on the desk of Steven Spielberg. Spielberg had already changed cinema with films like Jaws, E.T., and Jurassic Park, but this project felt different. He wasn't interested in making another futuristic action movie. He wanted to build a future that audiences would believe could actually exist. Filming began on March 22, 2001, only months before a world forever transformed by the events of September 11. Starring Tom Cruise as Chief John Anderton, alongside Colin Farrell, Samantha Morton, Max von Sydow, Catherine Morris, and Neil McDonough, the production slowly evolved into something far more ambitious than anyone outside the studio realized. Behind the cameras, the investigation uncovers an extraordinary decision.
Instead of asking Hollywood designers to imagine the year 2054, Spielberg invited real scientists, engineers, architects, interface designers, urban planners, robotics specialists, and technology researchers to help construct it. This private gathering became known as the 2054 think tank. It wasn't created to make the film look futuristic. It was created to explore which technologies were genuinely plausible within 50 years. Every transparent display, every biometric scanner, every personalized advertisement, every autonomous transportation concept, and every gesture-controlled interface emerged from discussions with experts whose job was to imagine tomorrow before it arrived. Suddenly, this case file stopped looking like fiction. It started looking like a blueprint.
If this document has already made you question how much of our present was imagined long before it existed, write "The file is open" in the comments. Every investigation grows stronger when more investigators join the archive.
By the time cameras stopped rolling in the summer of 2001, something unusual had already happened behind the scenes. Most science fiction films hire consultants to make imaginary technology look convincing. Minority Report reversed that logic. The experts weren't asked to decorate a fictional world. They were encouraged to imagine the future as if they were designing it for real. The result was a production unlike anything Hollywood had attempted before. When the film premiered on June 21, 2002, audiences were fascinated by its sleek visuals, but very few realized they were looking at ideas developed through months of conversations with people working on the frontiers of science and technology.
Among the participants were computer scientists, artificial intelligence researchers, biomedical engineers, architects, transportation specialists, and interaction designers. One of the most influential voices was John Underkoffler, whose work on gesture-based interfaces helped inspire the iconic sequence in which Tom Cruise manipulates floating screens with sweeping movements of his hands. At the time, it felt almost magical. Today, touchless interfaces, augmented reality,
Virtual reality, motion tracking, and spatial computing have become real fields of research and development. The line between cinematic imagination and technological innovation had already begun to blur. But perhaps the most unsettling prediction wasn't visual at all. Throughout the film, personalized advertisements recognize individuals the moment they walk into a shopping mall. Retina scanners identify every citizen. Massive databases connect identities, locations, purchases, and behavioral patterns into a single network capable of making decisions before people even realize they're being observed. In 2002, many viewers considered these ideas exaggerated. 2 decades later, targeted advertising, biometric authentication, facial recognition systems, predictive algorithms, and data-driven recommendation engines have quietly become part of everyday life across much of the world. Not because the film caused them to exist, but because it accurately anticipated the direction technology was already moving. And that's where this investigation becomes genuinely uncomfortable. What if Minority Report wasn't remarkable because it guessed the future? What if it simply recognized the future before the rest of us noticed it? If this evidence made you see the film from a completely different perspective, comment blueprint, not fiction. The archive is becoming more revealing with every document we uncover. At this point, the investigation leads to a conclusion that is far more disturbing than any conspiracy theory. There is no evidence that Minority Report predicted the future through supernatural insight. There is something much more believable and perhaps even more unsettling. Ideas shape expectations. Expectations shape innovation. And innovation eventually reshapes society. Once a convincing vision of tomorrow exists, engineers begin solving the problems it presents. Designers start building the interfaces people have already accepted in fiction. Investors fund technologies that suddenly feel familiar instead of impossible. Governments explore new forms of security, data collection, and automation because those concepts no longer seem abstract.
The future doesn't always arrive unexpectedly. Sometimes it arrives because enough people have already imagined it. That may be the true legacy of Minority Report. Steven Spielberg didn't simply direct a science fiction film. Together with Tom Cruise, the cast, Philip K. Dick's extraordinary source material, and the remarkable group of futurists behind the 2054 think tank, he helped create one of the most influential visual blueprints of the digital age. Looking back today, many of the film's most memorable scenes no longer feel futuristic. They feel strangely familiar. We unlock our phones with our faces. Algorithms recommend what we should watch, buy, and believe. Artificial intelligence predicts our preferences. Cameras identify us automatically. Data often speaks before we do. The uncomfortable question is no longer whether Minority Report predicted our world. The real question is how much of our world was inspired by the future it imagined. Perhaps every generation creates its own mythology about tomorrow. Sometimes those myths remain fiction forever. But every now and then, one of them quietly becomes an instruction manual. And that is why this file deserved to be opened. Because behind the action, the visual effects, and the unforgettable performances lies something far more valuable than entertainment. A rare historical record of the moment when cinema stopped asking what the future would look like and started helping humanity visualize it. File 001, Minority Report. Status: declassified.
But the archive is far from empty. Another file is already waiting. Another movie. Another impossible prediction. Another investigation that becomes harder to explain the deeper we look. Until then, remember the rule that guides every shadow reel investigation. Every file has a story. Some should never be opened. If this investigation changed the way you see Minority Report, leave the words, "The future leaves traces" in the comments. And if you're ready to open the next classified file, subscribe to Shadow Reel, because this is only the beginning of the archive.